Hey, I just wanted to do a new video series about Star Trek and start the new series, CBS series, Star Trek Discovery, which is coming out supposedly in 2017. I think that it would be a great foray into the Star Trek universe, an opportunity to learn more, so I'm probably going to get some of these things wrong, so I'd appreciate if people would correct me if I do. So, this is going to be mostly a breakdown of my opinions of where Star Trek universe is going and where the Star Trek Discovery series is taking it. And we're going to start off with the IMDb short and cryptic description of the new series, which reads, unknown plot, but detailed that the show will not be a regular TV show, but instead will be available as a new series for paying customers of CBS All Access and Netflix. The Discovery story will be set approximately 10 years before the original Star Trek with Kirk and Spock, and apparently will focus on an incident and an event in Star Trek history that's been talked about but never been explored, which seems to have been subsequently revealed in trailers from what looks like a potential pilot episode that depicts an early conflict with the Klingon Empire. The show's trailer featured the promise of a flashy new ship, which they do provide originally the USS Discovery, but then they also have the USS Shenzhou, which is the one that emerges from the cloud in the most recent trailer. So it's not actually the one that's for some reason it's not the main one yet. I guess they're just holding it back for later, for a bigger reveal or something. Which is the one that appears out of the sandstorm. Some new characters, notably Sonequa Martin Green from The Walking Dead. She plays the series' protagonist, first officer of the USS Discovery, and Michelle Yeoh, superior officer and who plays a captain, and Jason Isaacs, captain of the USS Discovery. So those are the ones that stood out to me the most out of them that I recognized. The new uniforms were pretty questionable, however, in my opinion, but the CGI graphics looked promising in terms of effort that they put into the production value, but ultimately they don't look much like Star Trek yet, but it's still in the really early stage of production, so hopefully they figure it out, because even when you go back to most of the old series, they don't really get it the first one, like the first Star Trek original with Christopher Pike pilot. It wasn't on point, really. I mean, it was really good, I liked it, but it was also really corny and like some things just weren't right. Or, for example, Star Trek Next Generation, someone else pointed out that it definitely wasn't all, it wasn't completely the best version of itself yet, because it needed more development and more character development before they could really come to terms with that. So it's really good to see a major studio putting effort into creating Star Trek stories, and I look forward to more stories being made in the future, because it really seems like that they're putting more effort into this to revitalize a lot of older franchises and reboots, and although that's usually not a good thing, they are putting more money into new Star Trek stories, so this isn't a reboot, so I'm glad that this isn't a reboot in some ways. The future, the paywall, the CBS paywall, however, could be a problem that could prevent some people, like myself, who don't have a Netflix account, from watching the series. So I'll have to wait until someone else gives me that password, because due to the exclusivity of it, which was a bit of a surprise to some fans, because we're not used to having Star Trek behind a paywall. But with the rise of Netflix and its original content, it really shouldn't surprise many of us that they would choose this option, considering it actually can reach to a much larger audience than cable can at this point, considering all the cable cutting that's going on and people like me who just use the internet instead. Like, we have a TV, but we don't use it for cable. There's no denying that although it isn't ideal for some people, it definitely is not going to prevent most of the really dedicated fans from actually getting a hold of it and seeing it. So whether they go through CBS or whether they go through Netflix or some other way, they're probably going to find it if they want to see it. So although but I do think it's still a problem, because it's going to prevent some people from seeing it when they want to. So there's another element to this. The CBS Productions entered into deals in order to purchase the rights to produce Star Trek content from Paramount Studios and Viacom, who previously possessed all the rights to Star Trek content. So this is where I might say something wrong, because there's a lot of legal jargon and a lot of other questions that I haven't looked into completely, but this is like a rough understanding of what's going on. But this has led to some controversies. The CBS movie this move by CBS to create a new Star Trek has originally appeared to fans like myself as a sign that mainstream is finally willing to invest a substantial sum of money into the new Star Trek TV type project rather than a big screen production. But as Discovery has finally started to take shape, this series has come under fire from multiple directions. So, I want to start out with talking about a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the content that's been shared about it and reviews, and I'll obviously share my own opinion on this. So initially, my first look at Discovery's trailer and looking at the content, the aesthetic of the new series, it resembled, in my opinion, the Kelvin timeline from J.J. Abrams, or maybe the Enterprise series with Jonathan Archer, and which came before it, because I think that they tried to completely reimagine a lot of the things and try and like wipe the slate clean, even though that's not really possible since you're already working with an already mastered piece of art. It's kind of hard to say you're going to wipe the slate completely clean. So they're going to expunge, they're going to choose which elements to keep and which elements to leave, which is going to be another part that I discuss later here. How do they actually determine which parts to keep and which parts to leave? So, and whether those were a good idea or not, we're going to discuss. J.J. Abrams, or the Enterprise series, which came before it, which in and of itself prompts me to raise the same criticisms and problems that came with trying to redesign a version of an earlier time in Star Trek that is far less like any recognizable Star Trek project and more like a sexed-up reboot of Flash Gordon with Star Trek window dressing for a modern audience. So, although that is kind of disparaging, I think that it really does fit what is going on here, because I think that they're trying to sex it up. They're trying to make explosions and car chases and things like that. And for God's sakes, this is Star Trek. Why are we having car chases? Why are we seeing ATVs? I don't really understand what this is supposed to be. This sounds more like Trailer Park Boys to me. But, you know, that's kind of part of this, is just like trying to change it for a modern audience. So we're losing little aspects of Star Trek along the way, clearly. They've decided they're worth jettisoning. So CBS has unfortunately decided to create several canon conflicts associated with the Star Trek timeline in the already existing universe, involving and also involving real-world legal problems regarding copyright infringement, distribution, and profiting from any creative and profiting from anything that is under their creative control, and anyone outside them profiting from anything that's outside their creative control. But it still has, in my opinion, I don't think that it's as bad as some people have said. So I think that I want to preface this because there is actually a way for them to escape from a lot of these things, and I'm really hoping that they do escape from it, because I feel like a lot of the criticisms are coming from people who are a lot less knowledgeable in Star Trek and about Star Trek. So for people like me who have spent so much time analyzing and watching every single episode of everything ever been produced, I really don't know if it can be said that, you know, some of these people that are immediately attacking it for being, you know, too diverse or too PC or something, even though usually that's one of my criticisms, I'm not going to go there for this one. I'm going to talk about how it affects the Star Trek universe and the fans and other legal issues, and that's more important to me right now. So I will fit those cultural criticisms into a future video, but this is just about the surface fandoms and other things about the legal issues. So, the Discovery story is supposed to take place, as I said, 10 years before Kirk and Spock, so that would make it approximately stardate 2240, which is 10 years before the launch of the original Star Trek Enterprise, which is the one with Kirk captaining it, even though there was one beforehand with Captain Pike and Spock, and beforehand with that with one with Robert April. So if people actually took their time to realize that, you know, there were other missions going on, Kirk and Spock were not the end-all and be-all, and there were actually several other ones taking place. These are taking, Robert April is from the cartoons, but in terms of the Spock one, that Spock and Captain Pike actually was the pilot episode that I've already discussed. So although its appearance may resemble the new J.J. Abrams timeline, it's supposed to be set in the Prime timeline, apparently, which is supposedly with all the classic character storylines, but potentially with some differences. The Kelvin timeline, as described by Memory Alpha, which is a really great Star Trek fan site for keeping track of these details, is part of an alternate universe which was created during the incident that took place with older Spock, and how they really created this was I got to set up this part. So for the J.J. Abrams storyline, we really have to talk about the fact that in Star Trek is really, unlike Star Wars or other ones, they really discuss the multiverse thing. So every time someone let's say, alters the timeline, that creates a different stream of time, and that those people and those choices that they make move onwards with that timeline in a different direction, kind of like a diverging stream. So in this case, the Kelvin timeline is referred to a different set of events where Captain Kirk's father I think he's this, not the captain, but he's a subordinate officer on the USS Kelvin, which somehow gets into an incident with a future Romulan ship, which involves Spock. So I'm going to go into all of this stuff and basically explain what the difference is between the Prime Universe, which is the classic universe, and the Kelvin timeline, which is going to come up a lot in this discussion. The place where older Spock takes place in the movies is in 2387, so that's quite a bit in the future. Obviously, Spock's a Vulcan, so he can live for hundreds of years. Spock tried to prevent a massive system-destroying cosmic disturbance from destroying all of these planets. So what he did was he used experimental red matter, and he basically released that into the how should we say this, explosion wave, whatever it is, and which created a black hole, which sucked in all of these the explosion wave. But unfortunately, he wasn't fast enough to save Romulus, so one of the planets got destroyed, which is kind of odd, because I think that's just to eliminate one of the most foundational species in Star Trek, just randomly, just destroy them. I found that I didn't like the Kelvin timeline. I don't like the Kelvin timeline, so yeah, it's not a very good idea in my opinion. So what that does is that enrages this guy called Nero, interesting historical reference to the crazed Roman emperor. But so Nero, this Romulan guy who's on like a pretty advanced ship for the old times, but just like a normal mining ship in 2387, basically he gets sucked into the wormhole and he ends up he goes back in time like 150 years and ends up meeting Kirk's father, because this ruins the timeline, right? So this is how the timeline gets changed. This wasn't supposed to happen. Spock, using the red matter, essentially like made this happen. So I guess it was a sacrifice, but he probably didn't expect this. So Spock and Nero in their respective ships get stuck into this thing. They end up seeing Nero sees the USS Kelvin, ends up destroying it, and that changes the whole timeline of everything. It pushes Starfleet back. They say that it basically makes them more militaristic. It makes them more violent. It makes them more prone to like a different historical record, because and then also Nero does something else which is extremely relevant, because in this Star Trek Beyond J.J. Abrams universe, Nero is successful in using the red matter to destroy Vulcan as well. So I found that very odd that they would choose to do that, because it seems to me like it seems like they're just like destroying entire civilizations and cutting entire ties that they could use for future episodes or future whatever. It just seems like, you could have destroyed any planet. I don't know why you're destroying home planets of giant species that are just, they've taken so many years to read and to expand on, and then I don't know. He just seems to just disregard all of this pre-existing stuff, and that's a commonality I'm seeing with the new series. That's definitely a flaw. So after all this stuff, blah blah blah, new universe gets created because of all the stuff that I mentioned, and that's the one and this new universe looks a lot sleeker, more advanced, more technologically updated for some reason. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'm not really sure. I don't really want to go into that because it's a lot of theoretical stuff. But although this new J.J. Abrams alternate Kelvin universe is very similar in many regards to the original Star Trek series, it also differs in the fact that it has new and updated technology and different character roles for old characters and a whole new library of new ones. A different Starfleet, which is much more militaristic, which I've already discussed as well. New alien species are created and injected into the series. Actors are all much younger, and the stories themselves seem to be much less authentic Star Trek, aside from the few nods to old jokes and original material. But they do have but I will applaud J.J. Abrams for resurrecting the old yellow, red, and blue uniforms, because I really felt that he did those justice, and I think everyone liked them, and they weren't old-fashioned or anything. Like, they looked old in the old series, but he updated them really nicely, and I think they did them justice. So yeah, moving on. For all it's worth, I actually must say that Kirk and Spock era fan. I really enjoyed the uniforms. J.J. Abrams, and I wanted to thank him for making it look modern and cool without sacrificing anything too much. And this is more of a nod to the original series, and I think both fans and viewers and new viewers would actually respond a lot better to more recognizable retro versions of these old costumes, even if they are updated slightly rather than the new Discovery or Enterprise or Into Darkness look. And you can even compare the box office of Star Trek Into Darkness with the original ones like Star Trek Beyond and the other J.J. Abrams one, because it really doesn't feel the same, and I think that part of it is them removing all of these. They're just slowly just chipping away at all the things that made it different than Star Wars or made it different than Battlestar Galactica. Like, what is the difference between them? Well, one of them is these elements, like the costumes, the retroness, the cliche in some aspects of Star Trek. I mean, that's what people like. A lot of the ethics and the philosophy is what I enjoyed in, and I didn't even realize until I was, later reading this stuff, but I actually really do enjoy those elements to it, which they are, engaged in destroying. The need to look updated, modern, and sleek in these new recent Star Treks, in my opinion, is one of the worst things that could be done in terms of how far off the mark every project falls whenever they try and follow this new formula. So I don't know what reason they have to ignore their core fan bases and to ignore the evidence of the box office. It's just bad for everyone. I don't know who's winning from this situation. They're not making money. We're not enjoying their products. I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. Sadly for Star Trek on the big screen, it's not likely, according to rumors from a number of the other actors in the J.J. Abrams series, including the fact that Star Trek Into Darkness was very disappointing in the box office, that the departure of J.J. Abrams from Star Trek to Star Wars series really shows that he's putting his focus on that. And I feel like for some reason, especially considering the projects that he's created, that he definitely was better at creating Star Wars. I mean, I don't think that he was set out. I don't think that he was the right person to be doing it. But I think that there were some things that he helped, that he did good with. But there are other things that I just clearly have a lot of problems with, and on a very deep Star Trek related level. The departure of J.J. Abrams is an important feature to discuss because what it says for the future is that there probably aren't going to be any more of those new Star Treks with Chris Pine as Kirk anymore, because that's basically dead now. Alright, so whenever a studio goes ahead with a reboot or a reimagining of a masterpiece like Star Trek, the so-called crown jewel of the science fiction community, with its large pre-existing fan base, there's also a huge gamble that it could create resentment among disgruntled core fans like myself if the project is mishandled, and I'm not sure that it's always worth the hassle, because I feel like they're skipping having to build up fans and actually make a good original product by just rebooting stuff all the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to avoid hassle or that you're not going to have to make a quality product. So I don't know. Instead, I might suggest that the future studios and creators should try their best to actually listen to fans and create works which respect existing art and stories instead of using them as stepping stones in order to bypass initial problems with getting viewers and people excited about their projects. Take it from me, and I obviously speak for myself and no one else in this particular aspect, but I want to see more Star Trek over the next 20 years that isn't like the Fast and the Furious window dressing. Like, I don't want it to be car chases. The more car chases I see in Star Trek, the less money I'm going to be giving towards them, because it just doesn't make sense to me. It's annoying, it's pandering, and it's destroying a really great piece of art for nothing, basically, because they're not making money. So I don't know who the hell they think they are. So this is another thing that I want to talk about. So this isn't just a criticism for J.J. Abrams. This was also something that happened in Nemesis, I felt as well, and in some aspects of First Contact as well actually made me feel this way as well. So this was even like with the last TNG Next Generation movies, like Nemesis, it falls into this category when it has an ATV scene in the desert. And it kind of reminded me of an ending you might see in Mission Impossible, of them sailing off a sandbank into a waiting shuttlecraft. Like, Although it's visually stunning, artistically done, and sounds great to executives who have ostensibly no knowledge or concern for the fact that those things have absolutely nothing to do with Star Trek or why people actually like Star Trek versus, like I said, Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek. Like, what is it that makes it different? Well, if you take all those things away, it will become indistinguishable from the background of other, slightly less important sci-fi series. So for the sake of honesty, I'm obviously disclosing already. I've said it multiple times. I don't even know why I'm saying it again. I really don't like the Kelvin timeline. It seems ridiculous and terrible, and it's just riddled with flaws and problems, and it just doesn't make sense to me. And it didn't even bother going to see Star Trek Into Darkness because honestly, the trailer, like I said, the more car chases I see, it like reduces the chance that I'm ever going to watch the movie if it has Star Trek in it. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's the same criticisms I had for Nemesis. It's ridiculous. All right, and then we'll move further on. I'll say my criticism the Loth of Fates with regard to the new interpretations of Star Trek universe post Star Trek Voyager are, of course, from a few examples, like the Nemesis movie, is that they have been continually drawing on the past instead of the future, as Discovery announced in their trailer, like being 10 years before Kirk, instead of 50 years after Janeway or something, which is what I actually want, and what I'm reading the comments is what everyone wants. Everyone who's a true Star Trek fan, who's not just a casual or someone who doesn't know anything, wants that. They want new stories. They don't want old, rehashed, rebooted content. They don't want things that are from before this, before that. Why can't we ever advance to the future? Which gives them a lot more creative license as well. Which is, if they're so worried about that, they should probably try and be original. And it is taking place before Kirk and Spock's original 5-year mission, which incidentally is not true, and some people should have fact that because it's just embarrassing. And after Enterprise with Captain Archer, in order to try and escape having to be restricted by most of the major plots and stories that have already been created, they basically did the same thing as Archer did, where they said, well, we're going to do it before that so we can create a new story. But Archer was set so much before Kirk that it kind of made more sense than this one. So the timelines are getting smaller and smaller. The window of opportunity is getting smaller and smaller. They claim that the new story of Star Trek Discovery takes place during what we shall refer to as the prime timeline, and excludes the aforementioned Kelvin Star Trek timeline. But they also seem like they did not want to be creatively bogged down. But I think that the fresh story that they're trying to tell is still going to be bogged down because they chose to fit it into a very small chip of time in between the original Star Trek and the TNG one, between the Enterprise and the original Star Trek. Once again, Star Trek core fans, which I refer to a lot in my opinions pieces upon this, the people who grew up during the golden age of Captain Kirk or Picard being on television, or even a younger crowd of people who can detect the originality and the dynamic characters which Gene Roddenberry created all those years ago, are pretty defensive of these characters. Like, that's why I'm so defensive of them, because I grew up with these characters. They were part of my development. I thought they were almost heroic figures to us, because at the time when you're a kid, you don't really have as many heroic figures that aren't, cartoons or sports figures or other things. So when you have an opportunity to watch people like Star Trek that actually have good morals and good values, I think that it really did rub off on me, and hopefully it's going to be part of my future forever as well. And I'm going to share it with my kids as well. I think that in their effort to avoid being bogged down, they've really done a lot more damage to themselves, and I think that I'm going to recommend this multiple times in this video. They need to do a video about other people need to do more videos suggesting this, but they need to do more shows after Star Trek Voyager. So after 23, whatever, that they need to do ones during that time period. So that's what needs to happen, period. Another issue which deals with the creative control and authenticity involves the Klingons' new look, which is displayed in the new trailer for the Discovery show. The Klingons in the trailer are depicted as looking so different from any other kind of depiction so far that it's really hard to understand why they would deviate so far from the source material. It's also worth mentioning what another YouTuber called The Frontier has pointed out, which was that the Vulcans, as you can see in the small scene which they are given, where the new actor cast as Sarek of Vulcan, Spock's father, is setting up, And he basically, so I want to ask, why do they feel that the Vulcans are still good the way they are? They're still good in the 1960s version is good, doesn't need to be updated at all, don't need to change anything. But the way that the Klingons needs to look like some cyberpunk aliens from Star Wars or Andromeda rather than any kind of Klingons that we've ever seen or would ever want to see on the big screen. They appear to be hairless, primitive creatures, with their leader having gold armor with red stones on it, which seems quite ornamental and maybe ceremonial, but the ornamental nature of it makes me think not Klingons, because they're not about that stuff. I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. While his subordinates and others around him have red or brown armor. It's very unusual for Klingons to have decorative clothing of any non-functional kind, but they also have them doing the funeral scream, warning the other warriors of their afterlife, of their journey to the dead Klingons' journey to the afterlife, which is the Klingon version of heaven, basically, or Asgard, as depicted in Norse myths. They are still carrying melee weapons, apparently, and I'm pretty sure what you can see as an interpretation of a bat'leth at one point when there's a face-off between the Starfleet officer Shaniqua Martin Brown and Martin Green and the other in the Starfleet EVA suit, and what looks like a Klingon in a very intricate battle armored gold suit. This is also a very there are also a few other details which I won't go into about how the Klingon controversy is sparked by the way they look, but the core fans seem to really care about this a lot. So I don't really care about what the casuals think as much as other people might think, because I care about how much money the project makes for the company that made it and how well it's received by the real core fans. That's all that matters to me. I don't care what casuals think. It shouldn't matter to anybody what casuals think, to be honest. But other than the fact that you're making a good product. But you shouldn't be concerned about what they think about the intricacies of Star Trek lore or whatever, because you didn't ask them the first time. You didn't ask casuals when they made it the first time. They just took a risk, right? You have to take risks sometimes. I see a lot of people not approving of the new look of the Klingons, fearing that their reboot is, as I said, an unnecessary rewriting of an alien race, which, unlike the Vulcans, they seem to see fit to leave them as the Vulcans as they were. And I was pretty much in agreement with these Star Trek purists for the most part until I heard another theory. While watching a bunch of material to get ready for this review, I stumbled upon a video where a fan had commented that it made a lot more sense for those Klingons in the Discovery trailer to actually be ancient Klingon ancestors who were awakened either by accident or by the crew of the Discovery or the other ship seen in the trailer, the Shenzhou. And the strange appearance of the Klingons is due to them having been out of hypersleep or suspended animation. So basically they're like ancient Klingons, and that's why they look like that, and that's why they're acting in this primitive manner, because they don't have any relation to the almost extremely humanoid looking versions of Klingons that are been confirmed to exist at this time period. So it seems like they are part of the prime timeline, but if they were part of the prime timeline, like every other Star Trek show, they would show the Klingons being really aggressive warrior culture in the future, but at the Kirk time period, they're very similar to humanoid creatures. They have the head ridges, and they have a little different uniform, but that's about it. They don't look like, you know, reptiles, dinosaurs in suits. They don't look like that. This theory is really extremely impressive to me, and I thought it out because it really interested me, because it truly eliminates the idea of there being plot inconsistencies with the existing canon, as well as allowing for creative freedom to operate in a more understandable way. If the Klingon sarcophagus that was also pictured in the trailer rising up is actually some historical ancient Klingon like Kalis, the Unforgettable, who is a character in the Star Trek universe. He is portrayed in the original series by Robert Harron and in Star Trek The Next Generation as Kevin Conway. His character is basically an original Klingon who started their codes of honor and is still, in their mind, the perfect representation of what a Klingon warrior is supposed to be. Although he actually wasn't, but it's not really the point, because that's just getting into the specific stories in TNG. It would also skillfully dismiss all of the critics and set up a new fresh look for the pre-NCC 1701 Starship crew with a more militaristic, action-packed exploration of the galaxy when the original history of the Federation was just being established, like the events of the Battle of Axanar and the 4-year war where the Klingons were taking place. So there is an opportunity for a lot of cowboy gallivanting around fighting wars kind of stuff. That you can do that without ruining everything. You just gotta pay attention and read what's already been written, and I guess that's difficult for some people. they didn't do themselves any favors if they have once again chosen to ignore all the established pre-existing Klingon canon. So I sincerely hope that the fan theory about them being ancient Klingons is right and that they aren't just messing with things. Because, once again, this brings up the topic I brought at the beginning, like, how do they decide what to leave and what to change? So they have these 1960s characters interacting with 2050 characters in terms of the way they look and the way they interact with each other. So the Vulcans, it doesn't make sense for them to be that way. It doesn't make sense at all. And also the fact that it looks like there are some scenes on Vulcan, so that also proves, like, if it was part of the Kelvin timeline, Vulcan would have been destroyed. So, yeah, that puts that whole Kelvin timeline to rest. Even though it looks like it's not. It clearly can't be. All right. So moving on to the thing. There's two final topics. So even though there's just been a trailer and some behind-the-scenes content released officially, there has also been various legal battles with competing fan creation called Star Trek Axanar, which I have yet to watch, but after this I'm probably going to watch it, since I've been waiting basically to do this video so I could finish that off. So I didn't have Axanar kind of informing me and trying to make me think about that rather than thinking about all the Discovery imagery and stuff that I've witnessed and have it in the forefront of my mind. It's a shadow project that was crowdfunded, which executives and high-ups in charge viewed as damaging and potentially stealing shine away from Star Trek Discovery, which is funny because now there's this Seth MacFarlane, Family Guy meets Galaxy Quest meets Star Trek. That's another YouTuber. That's not my line. That's someone else's really great line comparison that says, well, basically, it looks like the Orville movie with Seth MacFarlane is going to get more praise and more because it looks more like a Star Trek, which is exactly what I've been saying the whole time. Even if it's a goddamn parody comedy, it still gets more praise from Star Trek fans just because they tried this that much harder to be authentic and to be a little bit, not that you can't update it, you just got to be thinking and you got to be respectful. And so the Star Trek Axanar film is a fan film which is crowdsourced, and it involves many ex-Star Trek actors and producers and team members from old projects, making it look like a bigger budget mainstream Star Trek project. According to Wikipedia, The Prelude to Axanar is a 2014 American fan-made short film directed by Christian Gossett and written by Christian Gossett and Alec Peters. Funded through Kickstarter, the production sought $10,000 in original funding, but actually ended up raising $100,000 of fan crowdsourced money. They felt that it was threatening the existing Star Trek licensing agreements surrounding the distribution and ability of other entities to profit from said distribution of any unlicensed Star Trek productions. So there's intellectual property things, and they also clearly, like I said, they were threatened by this, and I'll get into specifically why they may be threatened. And they haven't really brought it up that much, but I think this is why. Interestingly enough, Axanar is pretty much, as far as I can see, not receiving mainstream support or nearly any visibility on a large platform. So like no normies are watching it, okay? And was instead a crowd-funded insider project made by and for core Star Trek fans and people who actually were responsible for making Star Trek's golden era material. So it was really frustrating, and I'm sure they were really frustrated the same way I am with the lack of good quality Star Trek productions being available. So in the recent years. So Anaxar plot focuses on a war between the Klingon Empire and the Federation and Starfleet, which happened around Stardate approximately 2241, 20 years before the original series with Kirk and Spock. And you know this because if you watched the original Star Trek, they reference it a couple of times. Very obscurely, but they do reference it. So the problem with this particular chronology is that there are accounts and mentions of this event, but most of them differ from whether it was a whole fleet on both a whole fleet of Klingons and a whole fleet of Federation, or if it was just Klingons, or if it was involving another race as well. But from what I can tell, it appears that 10 years before Kirk and Spock took command of the NCC 1701 Constitution-class Enterprise, and the fact that the Klingons appear in the trailer for the Discovery, it isn't a very far-fetched explanation to claim that the Discovery deals with the same events that will clash with anything that Star Trek Axanar is doing or has done in the past. So they wanted to do this whole we're doing a fresh start thing, but they clearly didn't even check. Like, there's a 2014 fan movie about it. There's other ones about it. They've done stuff on this. So it's not as clear-cut and free as they'd like it to be, intellectually speaking. So on all sides, it appears that those in charge of the rights to Star Trek there's actually no Star Trek going on, and they actually will bar anyone from making good Star Trek productions, even if they are people from that group of Golden Era crew. I assumed that suing the Star Trek Axanar production into submission was pretty much the only thing that the CBS studios and their lawyers could do, other than actually make an original Star Trek, in my opinion, which is short-sighted on their behalf, and actually causes even more problems than it's worth. Axanar was sued into such a state of submission that it wasn't allowed to profit in any way, having to disable even the YouTube ads to make sure they don't have any money, to force the production to make it shorter into two different versions, into two smaller versions, so it's basically making sure that it isn't in any way consumable, and then it's extremely, it's not really easy to consume, and it's not enjoyable to consume because they break it up into quadrants and they make it like they don't want it to resemble a Star Trek at all, basically. This was done in order to make sure that no more crowdfunding would ever see the light of day before they are smothered in a sea of paperwork and red tape. I found learning about this thoroughly disheartening as a fan, and I feel like this just goes further to show a disrespect for Star Trek fans and the Golden Era crew themselves and the people that were behind the scenes as well, and the writers, and in general disregard for anything that the original cast and crew believes in to be the spirit of Star Trek and what it represents. So, in terms of this is the last question, and I think that I've probably gone more in depth than the majority of people into these topics because I felt like I watched everyone's content and everyone was missing something. So I just needed to add something to all of these arguments because these are a lot of arguments from other people, but they definitely have my own flair to it as well. Another topic that needs to be raised, and I saw raised by other commentators, which I found particularly interesting and which spoke to a certain kind of strange evolution, but a bad evolution in my opinion, that seems to be occurring in Star Trek series over time, and it can be summed up in a line from Sonequa Martin Green and in a conversation with Michelle Yao where they're discussing taking action. Michelle, as a superior officer, states that Starfleet doesn't shoot first, to which Martin replies, "We have to." This line regarding shooting first and the lines after, which also involve a quite graphic description of violently severing of a head, really depicts the way that the new show's protagonist is actually the one pushing this violent shoot first, ask questions later narrative, while the older, more experienced Starfleet officer, Michelle, seems to remain steadfast in her commitment to actually upholding everything that Starfleet stands for. This small but important scene really illustrates the direction the new Star Trek directors and actors and writers and all these people are trying to push Star Trek into, and to be blunt, I'm completely against it. Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets was primarily designed to be about exploration and peaceful coexistence with other species, and that's one of the things that really differentiated them from all the other shoot-'em-up type of science fiction shows. It was about science, it was about ethics, it was about getting to be a peaceful, coexistent universe. It wasn't just about shoot everything that moves, and that's not what I wanted to turn into. If possible, combined with the Prime Directive, which is this rule that they have, which is that you do not interfere with technologically less advanced species. So you can see that they really care. They don't just go on, oh, we're just going to land in the middle of a fucking place and ruin everything and just make everyone see technology before they're ready and ruin their development. So they really cared about being subtle and caring about other cultures and being an intelligent, intellectual group of people who were not just a bunch of space cowboys. The new Star Trek directors like J.J. Abrams or the new writers of Star Trek Discovery are really doing a disservice to all that is Star Trek when they try and transform one of the most intellectual science fiction shows ever on TV into some kind of Wild West of violence and explosions. I'm not one to shy away from a good battle scene, or a good bloody gore battle, even if when it's necessary, but I really don't see how, for the sake of plot, but I really don't see how I really don't see how they can be so completely wrong and how they can portray the protagonist Starfleet officers who are not corrupt that should be advocating shooting first. I mean, this problem of replacing all the ethical debates or so-called floating conference room talking sessions, which seem to be part of so much of the TNG era, are really what made Star Trek different from other shows. No doubt this situation presents quite the dilemma for modern producers and audiences, which may or may not be receptive to the floating ethical conference room style of TNG, or the Shakespearean soliloquies of Kirk and Spock and McCoy, which they routinely delivered with, to be honest, as if they were actors on a stage. They could have been doing amazing, you know, Oscar-winning performances, and that's actually what they used to be. Now they're just shoot first, ask questions later. Modern audiences, especially younger crowds, will probably respond better to action-packed space battles than intellectual content and character development, but there should be a balance struck rather than having to pick one or the other. Action is metaphorically like junk food, which instantly feels good but is lacking in substance, while intellectual content, while engaging on some levels and potentially mysterious or deep, is the equivalent to salad, whose vegetables provide health, yet are not always entertaining alternative. If Discovery wants to continue further down this chosen path that seems to be being signaled by all the major productions since Voyager, have especially tried to drain any remaining uniquely Star Trek elements out of the plots and movies and shows, replacing them with gratuitous action scenes and fast-paced, simple dialogue. In order to preserve what actually differentiated what made Star Trek great from the other series and allowed it to flourish in a modern context with writers and producers, they need to be a lot more respectful of existing canons and try not to be so dismissive of what actually made Star Trek worth watching, because it wasn't the things that they're trying to add to it, which isn't the Fast and the Furious with green aliens in space. There is still time to attempt to resurrect one of the great crown jewels of the sci-fi multiverse, but only if they learn from their mistakes and don't let this become some kind of shiny-looking project, a product of a poorly thought out reboot factory with little to no ethical or philosophical content in between one-liners, making laser sounds and watching explosions. It really is starting to look like I'm being cynical, but I really think that that is exactly what's going on right now. All the things that made Star Trek individual, they've removed them, they've taken them out. It looks like it, but it's missing the substance. It's starting to feel like, I don't know. I think it's just it's slipping away. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can't let that happen. So all the people that really care about Star Trek and what differentiated it from pretty much every other type of science fiction story that's available right now, or has been available in the past, I think that it's important for core fans to stand up and to say that they really want, like I said multiple times, please, please, please make a series, whether it's TV or Netflix or whatever, it takes place in a timeline beyond Star Trek Voyager, beyond Picard, not before. Don't fuck with the timeline. No more temporal stuff. Something that happens after, because you know what? That's where all the creative freedom exists. So with that, I thank you, and if you actually made it to the end of this video, I really appreciate that. Have a good day.